the Evaluation Couch with Maria Montenegro. Hello everyone. I wanted to make sure that before the end of May, I recognize that May is the Mental Health Month. This is an initiative that was started by Mental Health America 75 years ago to promote discussions around mental health, to mobilize resources, to promote advocacy for better supports for mental health, and overall to work towards a better mental health for all. Every year, Mental Health Month has a theme, and this year's theme is Where to Start: Mental Health in a Changing World. The theme recognizes that we are experiencing a world where there's constant change that can influence our mental health. And this includes technology, which is rapidly evolving and so present in all aspects of our lives, climate change, which is exacerbating and impacting our well-being, as well as things like politics and the economy and conflicts around the world. In preparing for this episode, I downloaded a toolkit that was developed by Mental Health America, and it's included in the description of this episode. The toolkit is a great resource. It talks about the importance of this year's theme. It has resources for people to use. One aspect that I really enjoyed of the toolkit is that it has prompts to help you have discussions around mental health, both if you need support and you need to talk about things that are happening to you, or to help you start conversations with people who you think might need support. And one of the things that this toolkit says that I liked is, advocacy doesn't always mean talking to a government official or a local leader. There are things everyone can do to improve the way mental health conditions are perceived and treated. Storytelling is a powerful way to break down stigma and promote open conversations about mental health. This episode was inspired by this. One of my goals with this space is to advocate for a better evaluation field and better workplaces for all. And I think normalizing discussions about mental health, as well as celebrating the diversity of individuals within the evaluation profession, are both key to achieve this. So today, I would like to do a bit of storytelling and share with you my experience navigating my ADHD diagnosis. And then I would like to share with you how I used a strengths-based approach to reflect on how unique traits linked to my neurodivergence make me a better evaluator. And before I get into that whole story, I do want to share a bit of the behind the scenes of this episode. I just arrived 2 hours ago to Vancouver from Montreal, where I was participating in the Evaluation Capacity Case Challenge by the McGill-Maxwell School of Public Policy, which was an amazing experience. I knew that I was going to be away this weekend in Montreal and that I was going to be busy, and I really wanted to have enough time to edit the episode and release it before the end of May. So I actually recorded an original version of this episode a few days ago. And on my flight from Montreal to Vancouver, I was listening to the episode with the intention of remembering what I wanted the episode to sound like, and then arrive home and go through an editing process that was going to be smoother and kind of be ready to start the week with an episode ready to be published. But one has to be flexible, and I couldn't foresee what was just about to happen to me. I'm on the flight, and I'm about 30 minutes in on the recording when I kind of moved around, and from the side of my eye, I noticed that the person sitting next to me is writing, and in the writing, I see the word ADHD. And I'm like, no way. Like, how can it be possible that over the last 40 minutes, I've been listening to my episode about ADHD, and this person sitting next to me, I think, is doing something about ADHD as well. And it's just like, what are the odds? And I was a bit hesitant to say anything, but then I thought, what are the odds? So anyways, I found the courage to just approach this person and say like, hey, I know this is gonna sound a little bit weird and kind of creepy, but I think I saw you write something about ADHD. And then this person was like, yeah, I did. And then I shared with him that I was actually listening to my episode about ADHD. We were both like, wow, what a coincidence. It was also like such a great coincidence that it seemed like we were both very early on in our stage of having been diagnosed with ADHD and going through the process of like, where do we start? What do we do now? What does this mean? We ended up having a very great long conversation, and we just shared everything from our experiences being diagnosed and trying to make sense of what this means in our lives to how it shows up in our work. And then, of course, I shared what this episode was going to be about. He actually shared with me that what he was writing was jokes. He had just joined a stand-up comedy training, and part of his homework was writing jokes. And because this was like top of mind for him, all the jokes were about ADHD. It was just such a great conversation. I felt very understood, and I shared what this episode was going to be about. He had very similar experiences with ADHD, which felt very validating. So towards the end of our conversation, he told me like, hey, I think I should add a joke about this, how we just met and how weird this is. And I was like, yeah, I think I need to go home and re-record this episode and also talk about this experience. So anyways, not expected, but I had to re-record this episode. But I also figured that I have this energy with me right now after having a very great conversation where I felt understood and validated. I realized that the energy I had in me could really make this episode better. So I got home, I left my stuff, and now I'm here with the hopes that I'll be able to transfer some of my good energy through my words. And before I get started and sharing my story, I want to recognize that I am not an expert in ADHD. I am not a mental health expert either. I am still on my own journey of learning about this. I definitely don't like acronyms, and there will be an episode about this in the future. But for this episode, I will be using ADHD because the name is too long. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And I think the best way to get started is saying that the name of ADHD is not necessarily accurate for what it really is. To start with, it has attention deficit in its name. And actually what a lot of people experience is that they have a lot of attention. The challenge is focusing it or channeling into specific things. ADHD also has the word hyperactivity. However, you can actually have 3 different types of ADHD. You can have inattentive, hyperactive, or a combination of both. So you won't necessarily see hyperactivity in a person that has ADHD. And finally, the word disorder makes it sound like it is a disease when it is not. ADHD is actually a neurotype, which means it's a way of a brain being. Another important thing to share about ADHD is that there's still a lot of misinformation about it. Most people think that ADHD means that a person cannot focus, that they are fidgety, they cannot stand still, and that they're hyperactive. However, there is a lot more that comes with ADHD. And people also experience different symptoms and different traits in different ways. Some of the ways that some people may experience ADHD that are often less visible and less discussed are impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, disorganization, poor sense of time, and mood swings. People with ADHD also often have higher rates of other mental health conditions such as depression and may experience more employment issues. I will have to admit that ADHD was absolutely never in my radar. It was a complete surprise. However, the more I learn about ADHD, the more I understand my life and what I've experienced. And actually, my flight buddy's first line of his jokes was something like, ADHD makes everything make sense. And I think that reflects what it has been like for me. About 10 months ago, I was scrolling on LinkedIn and I saw a post of a woman whose name I do not know, and I haven't been able to find this post again. But the post was about how they were diagnosed when they were 40. And in the post, this woman shared her life, what it was like growing up, what it was like starting to work, and the challenges that she experienced, and how later in life she learned that all of these things were associated with her ADHD. And as I was reading a story of this woman's life, I couldn't help feeling that I was reading a story about my own life because everything sounded extremely familiar. And I couldn't shake off this feeling. But ever since that day, I just couldn't stop thinking of the fact that maybe all of the things I experienced and the challenges that I have still to this day could be associated with something like ADHD. So I started researching, I started learning about assessments, and I found that many clinics where I live have online tests that you can just kind of fill out, and they will let you know whether, yes, you should have a formal assessment, or no, this doesn't sound like ADHD. So I took a few of those and they all said, yes, you should get an assessment. And after doing more research, navigating the Canadian mental health system, trying to learn what was covered by our public healthcare, what could be covered by my private healthcare from work and my partner's work, and I ended up finding this clinic that specializes on ADHD assessments. I will say that in Canada, you can get an assessment of ADHD that is covered through our healthcare plan, but the wait times are very, very long. So I decided to take advantage of my extended benefits and I went to this clinic. And this assessment was, I would say, an evaluator's dream. It included validated tests to measure your cognitive functioning. It included consults with a family physician because they need to discard other conditions that could cause symptoms like ADHD. It included a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a nurse practitioner. It was pretty comprehensive. And as I was going through the assessment and they would ask me a lot of questions, I was learning more and more about how different symptoms and different experiences impact my life, my well-being, and especially impact other people's. A lot of the questions were framed like, has anyone in your life ever said this? And I was like, yes. So that was very enlightening, to be honest. When I finally got my diagnosis, because of all these questions and all the reflection that I was going through over weeks, I was pretty ready and I was expecting a positive diagnosis. I received a 40-page report that I would describe as a mixed method assessment with qualitative insights, very cool stats. And at that point, because I was expecting it, to be honest, the label didn't really bother me. I know that labels represent different things for people. In my case, I was just so curious and going through so much reflection and understanding about what this meant in my life that the label wasn't that significant for me. What was interesting after my diagnosis was sharing about the diagnosis. And I think this kind of relates to why do we still have a need in 2024 to have a mental health awareness month. When I shared my diagnosis with people that were close to me, I received different reactions. One reaction was, nah, I don't think you have it. You're doing okay. You're fine. And as much as this is encouraging, like, thank you for thinking that I'm doing okay in life, this comment can be pretty invalidating. And especially when I was going through just so much, like it was such a rich moment of learnings and reflections. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, I had people that were extremely supportive. When I shared with my boss, she was ready to understand how she can support me and what that means for me in terms of the workplace. I really appreciated that. And then my partner, he started this journey with me of reading books and learning about ADHD and what it meant for me and our relationship and my life and making sense of this new piece of information that none of us was expecting. Although I had this very comprehensive and great assessment experience, I do want to acknowledge that assessments are not accessible to everyone. As I mentioned, I spent several weeks trying to find out where I could get an assessment, how it would be covered, and I am very privileged that I was actually able to incur the costs of this assessment. But a lot of people cannot. The fact that I have a formal diagnosis does not make my ADHD experience any more valid than that of a person who doesn't. What I really wanted to do in this episode was share a little bit about my story, but also share how I've been able to frame my ADHD diagnosis from a strengths-based approach. And this actually came up very early on in my conversation in the flight today when my new friend asked me if I think ADHD gives me superpowers. And I was like, yes, actually, that is what my podcast is about. So we had a great conversation about the gifts that we have access to thanks to our ADHD and how our brain works. Well, I do want to discuss and celebrate the gifts that I have thanks to my neurodivergence. I also want to make sure that I'm not suggesting that ADHD is a superpower. I know that not everyone experiences it in this way, and it can be harmful to have a narrative around something like ADHD that diminishes the challenges and the accommodations and conditions that are required for a person with ADHD to thrive. So in order to account for this, what I'm going to do in my episode is I will discuss the strengths that I've been able to reflect on that I bring to my evaluation practice and my work. but I will also reflect on what conditions and accommodations I have had or currently have that have allowed me to actually use these strengths. I want to know that if you're not in an enabling environment, these gifts or traits can actually work in your disadvantage. It can create an environment where you are extremely frustrated in a workplace. And I think this highlights the importance of having conversations around mental health and having conversations and advocating for the accommodations that people need. So to this end, I use 2 questions to conduct my strengths-based assessment on how ADHD makes me a better evaluator. The first question is, what traits associated with my ADHD strengthen my evaluation practice and impact at work? And the second question is, what are the conditions and accommodations that enable me to embrace these traits? And there's 3 specific traits that I'm going to highlight. The first one is hyperfocus. Even though ADHD has attention deficit in its name, people with ADHD can also have these flows and periods of time where we have intense focus over one activity or task. Oftentimes, we experience this when we're doing something that we really like. And as you know, I like evaluation, so that definitely helps. When we are in these periods of flow, it's easy for us to ignore any noise or stimuli that is around us, and it can lead to very productive periods of time. It is not uncommon for people with ADHD to get a lot of things done in a very short period of time. One of the things that my friend and I were discussing in the flight today was that sometimes this happens at work. Within 2 hours, we can complete everything that we had planned to do in the entire day. And if you are in a position where you have room to act and to take initiative and start new projects, this really opens up a lot of possibilities to do things that increase your impact and that help you support your team and your organization. One of the things that I've noticed since launching the Evaluation Couch is that I've had a few people messaging me and saying like, Maria, this is great, but how do you have time to do all of this? And I think I haven't been given a good answer to that question yet, but it's hyperfocus. It definitely plays a big role in how I'm able to sit and just write these podcast episodes and then have these moments of flow because I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. When it comes to hyperfocus, workplace flexibility is key, at least in my experience. If I have to work in an environment where I have to be sitting in a desk from 8 to 4, regardless of what I have accomplished that day or what I haven't accomplished that day, that can be pretty challenging. If you do end up having a period of hyperfocus during those hours, then you might end up being bored if you have to sit around and you don't necessarily have other work that you can engage in. Another disadvantage of not having flexibility at work is that sometimes the hyperfocus can happen outside those hours. And being able to adjust your hours and leverage your periods of hyperfocus and of productivity can be extremely helpful and really make you feel like you're contributing and adding value to your work. The second ADHD gift is creativity. One of the things that is common for people with ADHD is that we have multiple thoughts happening at the same time in a very fast-paced way in our brains. And sometimes for other people, it can be difficult to follow the connection between these thoughts or the logical sequence of our thoughts. But on the bright side, this trait helps us think outside the box. It helps us see the big picture, and it helps us have different ideas that sometimes end up being innovative solutions to problems. When it comes to creativity, I think one of the most important conditions and enabling environments at work is being in a team that values and embodies the value of openness. A team where when you suggest different ways of doing things, there's openness and people are willing to try new things out for improvement. Another important aspect and enabling condition is to be in a position where you are allowed to take risks and you're encouraged to learn and try different things. On the other hand, if you are in a situation or in an organization where people are resistant to change and they do things because we've always done it that way, then it can be challenging and it can actually limit your creativity, which can create frustration. And the third one is being spontaneous. And this might look like different things. I was reading in a website that this can look like being the life of a party. And I don't know if you have partied with me, but I think if you have, you might be nodding and being like, yeah, that can happen sometimes. But when thinking about work and my evaluation practice, spontaneity also allows me to be comfortable and actually really enjoy challenging the status quo and also being open to change. One thing that really resonated from my conversation today was that we both discussed how we always seem to have something that we're fighting for at work. There's always like a mission or a project that is challenging that we truly believe should be implemented. So we just like keep at it because we want to change. We want to challenge the status quo. And that's what spontaneity looks like. Identifying the enabling conditions for this one was a little bit more challenging for me. I think it is because in general, trying to promote change can be exhausting by itself. As humans, in general, we are resistant to change. So there's always this aspect of trying to make change happen, and this can be a bit exhausting. I was trying to think what have been some key factors that have helped me maintain my spontaneity in the past. And these have been celebrating wins, especially when they take a really, really long time to happen, having these wins celebrated and recognized by others, and finding people, even if it's only one person, that are willing to be right next to you in the fight. So I just want to emphasize, this is different than having someone supporting you and being like, yes, you should continue doing this. This is great. This is important. But having someone that is actually willing to say like, okay, what can we do to move this forward? And willing to be able to put in that work. Before closing out this episode, I do want to share that one of the things that I've learned throughout this experience is the importance of having a team that complements your skills. Many stereotypical ADHD traits are at odds with what is expected of evaluators. It's been great to have discussions within my team around what are our strengths, what are our challenges, to have open discussions about mental health, and to really build a team that complements each of our strengths. As I was reflecting on this, I remembered that I recently watched the World Bank Independent Evaluation Group's Future of Evaluation webinars that happened a few weeks ago. And there was one specific webinar around the direction of the field of evaluation. And there was one specific speaker called Elliot Stern who said, I see multidisciplinary evaluation teams as the dominant vehicle for evaluation implementation rather than individualized evaluation gurus that was characteristic of 20th century evaluation practice over the future. And that is a vision that I'm trying to implement in my work. And this is why I feel comfortable here in this episode sharing this with you. I'm very aware that I bring strengths into the evaluation practice, and I'm very open to creating a team and a space where my strengths and their strengths complement each other. So to close off this episode, I wanted to share a few resources that have been very helpful in my mental health journey, especially as I navigate this diagnosis. The first one is Stolen Focus, which is a magnificent book I recommend reading. It's not specific to ADHD, but it will 100% change the way that you see our use of social media and screen and our ability to focus. The second book is perhaps my number one favorite for ADHD-related content. It's a book by Dr. Gabor Mate, and it's called Scattered Minds, The Origins and Healings of Attention Deficit Disorder. And then lastly, I would like to share, and I know this is going to sound very millennial of me, but a great resource for me as I've navigated this diagnosis has been social media, and in specific, a few people or influencers that have focused on raising awareness, informing about ADHD, and also providing tips for navigating ADHD symptoms. A few of my favorite are ADHD Chatter Podcast and Future ADHD. These accounts are not a replacement for counseling services or professional help to navigate and treat ADHD, but to me, they have been great sources of information and also very validating. Finally, I want to recommend a person that I just started following, but has great content related to ADHD, how to communicate with people with ADHD in a more friendly way, and who has a research that really helped me frame a lot of the content of this episode. Her name is Ettie Bailey Key from Fighting Talk, and she has some of the best resources related to ADHD that I have come across so far. I specifically encourage people reading some of her tips for communicating with people with ADHD in a more inclusive way. Our communication is a great place to start in our journey of making workplaces better for everyone. So to close off, I just want to thank my flight buddy. If you end up hearing this, thank you so much for your great conversation and inspiration and for making me feel validated. I also want to thank everyone who's working on producing accessible, informative, and relatable content on social media. And this includes that woman who posted the story that started all of this. I really wish that I would know her name, that I could reach out to her and just share everything that I've experienced since reading her story. And also thank you to everyone with whom I've shared, especially over the last few months, my story and my diagnosis. Thank you for being supportive. I can't underscore how important it is how we react, the words that we use, and the things we say when people reach out to us, especially if they're trying to figure out where to start.